The hashtag is WorkEqual. So please tweet away, post away, whatever your platform or forum is, share the love. And also, if you wouldn't mind keeping your audio muted for today's session, that would be fantastic. As I've mentioned, we have a fantastic roster of speakers today, international best practice keynote speakers with their lessons and learnings and gold standards from abroad. Special guests, and obviously we'll introduce each of these one by one. Special guests sharing their experience from the workplace, and then a panel discussion for the Irish content, and amazing participants in that panel discussion. So without further ado, it is my very great pleasure to remind you that we have had an ongoing partnership and relationship with the Icelandic administration, and we are joined today by the Secretary General of the Icelandic Women's Rights Association, Brynhildur Heiðar-og Ómarsdóttir. You're very welcome, Brynhildur.
Thanks, Sonia. Hi, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to be with you today. I am very happy to be here to speak about the childcare system, the daycare system here in Iceland, because it is unfortunately very rarely that people ask us about the system. Sort of like, I think often people abroad think that sort of like the childcare system is not very exciting. It's not, you know, as sexy an option as thinking about sort of like corporate practices. But in fact, sort of like we found here in Iceland that sort of like our childcare system is the absolute foundation for everything that we have achieved in achieving gender equality. Now let me see if this works. Yes, this works. So yeah, so which is what I entitled my talk today: Foundation for Gender Equality is a universal and affordable daycare. And that's basically sort of like the main thesis, and I stick by it. Sort of like I want to begin sort of like I think I would probably lose my sort of like, you know, card-carrying membership of the Icelandic nation if I didn't start like with this slide. Showing that we're on the top of the Global Gender Gap Index in 2021 I think we've been there for over a decade now, which means that sort of like, I mean, it's obviously fantastic results, but, you know, also I want to point out sort of like that this slide also shows that we reached 89.2% equality according to those criterion, which means that we are unequal still, though we have come pretty far. And one of the main drivers for our equality is our daycare system. And this is sort of like a daycare system that's based on a policy that we share with the other Nordic nations of Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Sweden. It's sort of like we have this firm belief that the state is absolutely obligated to support families to provide the best care available for their children, and that this support is necessary for two reasons: not only to take care of the children, but also to allow both parents to enter the workplace. Again, sort of like that people have a fundamental right to participate in the economic labor market. That being said, Iceland is actually an outlier in the Nordic countries. We are the only Nordic country that have not passed legislation guaranteeing daycare. Sort of like we have this by practice, a universal daycare, but it is not guaranteed by law. And we are also the only Nordic country which does not cover the care gaps. That is sort of like in the other Nordic countries. As soon as the parental leave ends, children have immediate access to daycare. That does not happen in Iceland. We still have 6 to 12 months, depending on where parents live, where parents have to cover childcare themselves. And as we all know, unfortunately, it's usually the mother that takes the brunt of that care, sort of like leaving work or taking part-time work to take care of the children, which of course explains why is one reason why we still have not achieved full gender equality. One of the reasons I firmly believe, actually, I firmly believe one of the reasons why we are such an outlier is that we are also an outlier in the Nordic countries in political participation of women. So here is a graph that I've put together, sort of like with a number, the ratio of women in the Icelandic parliament, starting from the first parliamentary election where women were allowed to vote and run for office in 1916. And as you can see, until the 1980s, we were hovering around 2% to 5%. That means sort of like during the large part of the 20th century, we only had, 0 to 3 women in parliament, and it's only in the 80s that we start rising, and only in the past decade that we've sort of like broken the glass ceiling and have come anything approaching to true equality in representation. And we can see that sort of like, and this means that sort of like when the other Nordic countries, which were where women were gained power or like gained access to parliament earlier, they were able to pass legislation guaranteeing daycare while we did not. And we can actually see that sort of like when we're looking at the legislation in Iceland, is that in the throughout the 20th century, the people in parliament that were speaking for daycare were the women that entered the that were in parliament. So the first person to speak on daycare was in 1946, Katrin Thoresen, then the only woman in parliament. She began advocating for daycare in parliament, and it was, promptly, sent to a committee where it was killed, which was fairly, and and that's it. That was the end of the matter. And it's only in the 70s that sort of like the issue comes up again. And then, of course, because we see then the second wave, a global second wave of feminism and feminist activism starting to advocate for daycare as a political issue, that's an issue that needs to be covered in parliament. So and the parliament then sort of like begins sort of like finally trying to sort of like come up with some sort of legislation. So, for example, they had passed laws guaranteeing state support for municipalities, that the state is not going to be running the schools, but sort of like will support the municipalities if they want to, sort of like, but leave it up to the municipalities to decide whether to build daycare centers. And then in 75, the UN International Year of the Woman, they finally passed our first maternity leave legislation guaranteeing only working mothers, not home workers, homemakers, 3 months of paid maternity leave. And at that time, I think about 50% of the women in Iceland were in the labor market at the time. So it didn't cover. It only really covered 50% of the of women. And here is actually one of my favorite. Oh wait, there we go. This is actually one of my favorite pictures from this decade. This is the red stocking, sort of like. What happened was that sort of like a group of young women sort of like began sort of like revitalizing the women's rights movement, the feminist movement in Iceland. And they sort of like daycare was one of their top issues. So what they did, because there were no studies being done on the issue, because the state didn't care about it, the municipalities didn't care about it, so they conducted their own research. So they sort of like created their own studies of sort of like, the views of parents in their local communities. And here's a picture from Kópavogur, which is the town in the center, close to Reykjavik, where they had sort of like gone and done a survey of the parents in the township, and sort of like created sort of like a presentation, sort of like showing the great need and lack of daycare in the community. And sort of like you can see a town councillor like sitting there staring at this young woman in her 70s miniskirt, and she's like, and then of course in 75 we had wait, there we go. I have such a responsive. Wait, sorry. Oh God, I have such a responsive mouse. Wait, okay, hang on. There we go. Well, the women's strike, right, of 75, right? The women's strike, obviously, which was founded on the women's strike, was basically sort of like this idea that all women in Iceland, even like if we don't agree politically, we can all agree that we want to have be paid equal for our work. And that was the essence of the women's strike, sort of like the right for true and equal participation in the labor market. So these sort of like these events of the 70s are sort of like the starting point of sort of like how we got to where we are today. Right. So just a quick, yeah. So in 1980, we saw, and I basically sort of like put together sort of like a mixed match. It's sort of like you can't really discuss daycare without discussing also sort of like your rights to parental leave. Sort of like those issues are interlinked, because if you want to sort of like that you need to sort of like cover the whole gap. So. In 1980, we got a law guaranteeing all mothers, and it was definitely mothers, 3 months of paid maternity leave, sort of despite whether they were in the labor market or whether they were working from home. And from that, and then for the first time we see the paternity leave, sort of like one month was transferable to the father if the mother wanted to, or if both requested. In 1990, maternity and paternity leave was increased to 6 months. In 1991, we've heard our first comprehensive legislation on play schools. We call them play schools in Iceland. It's a part of our education system. They're not preschools, they're play schools. I love it. And there was a great push at the time that sort of like we want that this comprehensive legislation would follow the Nordic model, which means that it would absolutely guarantee children daycare, that it would absolutely guarantee daycare from the end of the maternity and paternity leave, and that it would set a fee ceiling on daycare. But it didn't happen. We didn't have enough power then in Parliament to actually push that through. So the only thing that sort of like the legislation did, which actually it was that it sort of like, you know, set the framework, that it sort of like set standards of how play schools would operate, but the responsibility was put on the municipalities, but not the duty, just the responsibility, with no age limit and no fee limit. So what happens then in the last decade of the 20th century is that women got into power in Reykjavik. So a new coalition came into power. The first women mayor of Reykjavik, Ingibjörg Sólrún Gísladóttir, she had been a member of the feminist party, the Women's List, and sort of like in her coalition, it was their sort of like main issue that they wanted to build up a comprehensive play school system here in Reykjavik and guaranteeing daycare from the age of 24 months. And they started this huge push in building play schools. And obviously, once that happens in the largest city in Iceland, actually the only city in Iceland, and about 60% of the population lives in Reykjavik. And once they start having this push, everyone else needs to follow, because, you know, if they don't, people will be moving to the capital, right? So they put this peer pressure on the other municipalities to follow suit. And then sort of like, you know, what has happened, and which is what happens, sort of like, so for the past 2 decades, sort of like every single municipality in Iceland has sort of like guaranteed play school daycare and play school coverage for their children, not because of a responsibility put on by law, but because of, frankly, peer pressure and and of course at this point now the expectations of every parent in Iceland that they will have access to this daycare. And we've also seen sort of like great improvements in our parental leave. So in 2000 we had the leave was increased from 6 months to 9 months, and the idea was that it would be equally divided, 3 months between again, that then was talking about the 3 months for the mother and 3 months for the fathers, and 3 months to be shared equally. Of course, in practice, sort of like once we started looking at the numbers in the last decade, we saw sort of like that this 3 months of common leave, about 99% of that was taken by the mothers. So it wasn't actually equal parental leave, it was, you know, equal in name only. So last year we finally passed equal parental leave divided 6 months between each parent, and it's a gender neutral act, 6 months divided between each parent. However, 6 weeks of that is transferable to the other parent, but that is a right that needs to be relinquished. So it's sort of like it is a step in the right direction to true equal parental leave. So how does the daycare system in Iceland work? And this was actually fairly interesting to look into it, because the system is run by municipalities. It's sort of like a patchwork system, and there isn't really sort of like, there aren't many comprehensive reports on this. But this is what I can say. Every municipality, every township, every countryside, everyone in Iceland offers guaranteed admittance to play school for children from the various ages. In municipalities where the age of guaranteed play school is higher than 12 months, authorities try to guarantee private daycare options, which would be sort of like day parent. We call them day parents. They operate from their homes, and they need to be sort of like regulated and supervised by the municipalities. But however, there are no limits set on the fees that the day parents offer. There's no guarantee of admittance. A day parent can sort of like, you know, admit a child and then sort of like, you know, stop caring for the child without any repercussions. That daycare is subsidized by the municipalities, but tends to be more expensive than sort of like the public option that becomes available at a certain time in every municipality. 4 years ago, when every municipality in Iceland was contacted, and they were asked if they were working towards lowering the age where the play school was offered, half of them said that they were. So there is a great thirst, and there is a great political willingness also in lowering the age where every child can attend daycare in Iceland or play school. The average age of entering play school in Iceland is 20 months. And I'm sorry, this is an incredibly complicated graph, but if you see sort of like the blue column there on the right, this means that 50.7%, that's the percentage of a population which lives in a municipality where sort of like the average age is 24 months. And then you have sort of like the 21 months is 8.5. So it's basically, you know, half of them, you know, are entering at 2 years old, half of them are entering play school younger, and sort of like 1.6% of the population lives in a township where children are actually entering play schools at the age of 9 months. Right, and these are the numbers. Number of children in daycare, play school or private care. These are figures from 2017. So you can see sort of like, you know, younger than 12 months, the vast majority of children, you know, almost 94% are at home. They are not in daycare. At 1 year old, most of them have entered into some sort of daycare. 43% of them are already, you know, entered into a play school. 33.7% are, you know, are with day parents or in daycare in private homes. By the age of 2, 94 are in play school. 3-year-old 96%, sort of like these numbers are sustained, and sort of like so it is the absolute sort of like universal daycare. We use this option when we want this option. This is sort of like we consider this sort of like a part of our daily life. That's sort of like, you know, yes, children need to go to play school because that is the best place for children to learn how to play and be ethical and democratic citizens. All right, here we go. And you can see here, and this is why I went into the sort of like history also, sort of like of when these changes were happening. So these are labor force participation figures in, right, okay, I don't know what this in is, but so you can see here the number of, or the percentage of women and men in the labor force in Iceland. So in 1920, 1930, 1960, sort of like it doesn't really change. You have, you know, 35% of women in the labor force and 85 to 90% of men. I'm missing here a column for 1970, where about like we can see here like a changing society. In 1970, there's a gap there. That's that women there are about 50%. By 1981, women are 65% labor force participation. This is when sort of like the daycare options are being expanded, starting from the 70s. So, and they continue to expand, but very sporadically in the 1980s. So, and labor force participation of women rises in, you know, respondently at, you know, and is by 91 is 74%. And here's when Reykjavik starts its great push to build these play schools, and all of the municipalities follow suit. And labor force participation rises to 80%, and it hasn't gone down since. It's still, women are now usually around 70 to 81% of the labor force, and men are about 82 to 84% of the labor force. These numbers have stayed the same since 1995, and we have the highest ratio of women working in our labor market in the OECD countries. And we consider this sort of like absolutely the key to our gender equality, because, you know, without financial independence, without economic independence, there can be no women's liberation. Women need to have money to be free. That's right, like the absolute basis of equality or freedom, I guess. So, and I was also then sort of like, and I spent so much time trying to, the play school fees in Reykjavik, I just looked at, because this is a municipal level, I looked at the capital city where I live in, sort of like how much does it cost per month to be in play school, to enroll your child in play school. And a child can be, the opening hours are from 7:30 in the morning to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And a child can be enrolled, you know, from 4 hours per day up to 9.5 hours per day. Sort of like, so it depends on what the parent wants or needs, or what the family needs to require. And there are actually 2 pay scales. Sort of like the higher pay scale is called Group 1, and it's basically married parents or cohabiting parents and even if one parent is a student, if sort of like, you know, if there are two parents and that they live together, sort of like they pay this higher fee scale. And then there is a lower fee scale, which are single parents, cohabiting parents where both are students, parents where one or both parents are disabled, and also employees of the Reykjavik play school system. And so this is sort of like what a person would pay, sort of like if they had a child. So, you know, you pay 69, the higher pay scale is actually 69 euros per month for 4 hours. You know, you go up to 8 hours, it's 185 euros per month. And also, and if you're a lower pay scale, it's 38 euros per month, and 8 hours is 123 euros per month. What happens if you have many children, if you have more than one child, you have a sibling discount. And this is where I sort of like really simplified the many tables that I was working from. The sibling discount is basically 100% of the study fee. So if you have 2 or more children in the play school system, you only pay full fees for the youngest child. And then sort of like you get a severe discount from the other children. Sort of like there is a set unchanging monthly fee for food for each child. So it's 16 euros per month for each child for, you know, under 5 hours, 63 for 5 to 7 hours, and 79 for 7 to 9.5 hours. But after that, sort of like everything else is sort of like discounted. So you only pay for the food, but otherwise it's free. Where are we? Yeah, I think I talked about paternity and maternity leave. There we go. Right. Father's taking. Yeah, this is sort of like, and you can see here. Yeah, I added this sort of like this is also because this is also a part of sort of like what we consider sort of like one aside from having the daycare system, you have sort of like the parental leave, and because we've had an equal, like we've had a quota, a set leave set aside for fathers since at least 2000. We have the vast majority of men taking paternity leave. And unfortunately, I don't have the recent figures. It's slightly rising again. We've basically had since 2000, the vast majority of men are taking paternity leave to take care of their children. And this has changed also the expectations of our parents. That sort of like when you poll people in Iceland and they are asked sort of like who should be responsible for the care of infants, the population says both parents. Right, so it is that is also an integral part of sort of like that, you know, goes alongside with the daycare system and sort of like changing the social system of Iceland. Yeah, here is a part of legislation dealing. This is a part of our Gender Equality Act, and this is sort of like meant to put responsibility on the employers, so the corporations in our labor market to help support the daycare system. Every company or institution or workplace with 25 or more employees, they need to have a gender equality plan. And this equality plan needs to be renewed every 3 years. And specifically say, a part of this plan is that sort of like, yeah, it's employers shall take the measures necessary to enable their employees to reconcile their professional obligations and family responsibilities irrespective of gender. Such measures shall inter alia be aimed at increasing flexibility in their organization of work and working hours in such way as to take account of both employees' family circumstances and the needs of the labor market, including facilitating the return of employees to the work following maternity, paternity, or parental leave or leave from work, blah, blah, blah. So this is sort of like, this also puts the onus on the employers to respect the sort of like daycare system and the responsibility of family life. All this and these sort of like these systems, like these are just some of the tools in the toolbox that we're using in Iceland to sort of like to eradicate the gender pay gap, and sort of like, and they are working. They are so working, and we've seen just in the past decade, we've just seen phenomenal changes in our gender pay gap. So gender income equality here is. So I think this is the figure that people usually talk about, that you were talking about when you're talking about the gender pay gap, the unadjusted gender pay gap. This is sort of like just the gap on an hourly basis between the wages of women and men. We in 2010 the unadjusted gender pay gap was 17.5%. In 2019 it was 13.9%, and I actually sort of like put 2019 there because I was afraid to use 2020 because of, you know, we're not sure if those figures are right, because obviously it was a very interesting pandemic year, but it was actually sort of like it dropped to 12.1%, so from 13.9% to, and so we're waiting for next year to figure out if it was a fluke or if it was actually, oh my God, we're like, things are finally clicking here in Iceland. Everything is just coming together into eradicating it. And you can see here also the adjusted gender pay gap is also lowering. In 2020 it was 4.1%. Again, we never look at the adjusted gender pay gap. So what the adjusted gender pay gap means obviously is that it's again the gender pay gap on an hourly basis, but they take into account sort of like the different labor, like the different job fields, sort of like, are you working in construction work or are you working in caregiving? But of course, that's also a gendered fact. We in Iceland have sort of like, if you are working in a female dominated profession, the wages are going to be lower, and that's just the sheer fact that we live in a sexist society. So we don't look at the adjusted, you know, the gender pay gap is just a way of hiding inequalities. Again, also what is becoming increasingly common in Iceland, and many labor unions are now starting to use this figure instead. It's the income gap, because what the gender pay gap does is that it also hides sexism. By focusing on the gender pay gap on an hourly basis, you are eradicating so like all the differences that is caused by part-time work. And we know that women are more likely to work part-time work than men, because they're doing unpaid labor at home, because they're still taking the full more responsibility for the care of children and for the care of households. So what sort of like more and more institutions are doing, they're now using just frankly the income gap, the monthly income gap, just the average wages of women and average wages of men that is put into your bank account at the end of each month, and sort of like without any sort of like calculations, just these brute figures. And these are sort of like, you know, the figures that I personally, and you know, we in the feminist movement, increasingly in the labor movement, and now the government is also now starting to include it in the calculations, but these are the numbers we're looking at. And we've seen a drop of that from 32.9% in 2010 to 25.5% in 2019. And again in 2020, we'll see if it was a fluke. We had dropped out to 23.5%. Again, we're not there yet. This is my feminist to-do list. Sort of like these are things that I'm working on. We all are working on regarding daycare. We need to bridge the care gap. So for example, Reykjavik, where I live, we have guaranteed daycare from the age of 18 months. We have parental leave that lasts 12 months. That means that there are 8 months that parents in Reykjavik need to cover. Sort of like they puzzle it together by taking sort of like early summer holiday or sparing their summer holidays to take care of, like, you know, they tap their networks of grandparents, and sort of like, and unless you have an extended network or like a very flexible employer, that like, this becomes impossible without somebody leaving their job to actually do this work. So we need to bridge the care gap between the end of parental leave and to the start of guaranteed daycare. We need to pass national legislation to guarantee universal daycare and to set the fee ceiling for this daycare. So like that this cannot be put onto this responsibility or this duty cannot be put onto municipalities. We need to have this a guaranteed right. And then a final one, we need to guarantee pay equity for childcare workers. And this goes into what I was talking about earlier, that female dominated fields like daycare work is less valued in society than male work. And we need to guarantee that the workers who are working in our daycare are being paid fair and equitable wages in a society. And we actually have an ongoing effort now at the Prime Ministry to actually begin doing that work, looking to New Zealand and Canada for inspiration and sort of like, you know, raising the wages of, you know, entire fields of our profession. So that's actually sort of like something really exciting that's going on in Iceland at this point. And of course, just for a quick end, again, I want to sort of like the work of WorkEqual is fundamental, and every single grassroots organization working for daycare, like without the rat stockings in 1971, without all these sort of like organizations in Iceland that have worked for gender equality, without all the women and men who have gone to the streets and participated in the women's strikes, like this would not be happening here in Iceland. So like you need to have public pressure to sort of like pressure the government and actually doing the right thing and creating a society that works for everyone. Where am I? Yeah. Yeah, and so the last strike in Iceland was 2018. It was a Me Too strike. Like we weren't going to have a strike then, but in the wake of Me Too, obviously, sort of like it expanded our definition of what we need to worry about, like that equality in the workplace also needs to focus on the security of women and everyone working in the work field. And the slogan for that strike was actually "Don't change women, change the world." It was in Icelandic, it's actually "Change society," and that actually works, really well. Also for like daycare, right? Like you don't need to change women. You don't need to empower it. Like you don't need to sort of like give them the tools for personal empowerment. You need to change society. You need to change the infrastructure to provide women with equal access. That is the only way to guarantee true opportunity. And and just a quick gift, sort of like these are, I love this one. These are just sort of like women that are gathering in 2018 for the meeting here in Reykjavik. So it's kind of fun. It's fun. It was very cold though. It was like minus 3 degrees. Right. And so basically it was here. God, this mouse. So in the end, I think my final message is everyone here support a strong and vibrant feminist movement. So like if you're not a part of an organization that's working on women's rights, join one. Like you don't have to be an active volunteer, but you can pay them to actually do the work for you. So like without the work of this movement, nothing will happen. So I think that's sort of like perhaps my final message. Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to ring it.
Thank you so much, Brynhildur. So much in there to be inspired about, and I can see the chat. Please do share your comments. It is incredible to see what's possible, and I think a lot of roadblocks are put up at every point in time to say why things aren't possible. I suppose Iceland has proved that it is possible, and I was in discussion with your ambassador to the UK recently, and I said, if you want to make an argument to a government about why universal childcare is a good idea, he said to me, just show them the bottom line. And I think in terms of female participation in the workforce, you can really see the unlocking power to an economy of facilitating women to join the workforce. Fantastic stuff. It is now my pleasure to invite our next guest, who I'm sure is buzzing after that presentation as well. Michele Doull is Head of Professional Learning and QA at the Early Years Institute in Scotland, and has really amassed a career focused on the best practice from the child's perspective. And Michele, I'm dying to see your presentation.
Thank you so much. Oh gosh, what a welcome. I hope I live up to it. Yes, absolutely. What a fantastic presentation from Brynhildur. Thank you so much for that. And when we think we're doing well, you then hear other perspectives and you think actually it's not about just stopping and saying we've done enough, and we definitely don't think we've done enough yet in Scotland. But yes, thank you from Early Years Scotland here. Excited to come and participate in this because we are on our journey in relation to all things that have been mentioned so far. And just as a kind of quickly, I know time's probably against us, we are a third sector organisation who are a membership organisation. We offer professional learning, but one thing about us is we offer direct services for children and families, because we truly believe in the power of children and families having experiences together. So whilst we completely advocate having the entitlement that we do have, that I'll speak about, we're very much mindful of the research that's out there that does show those connections. So all our services have qualified practitioners So it's called Stay, Play and Learn. And the reason we have 2 is because we appreciate the needs of parents who need role models, who need someone to possibly give some guidance, some advice. So we have this in schools, sort of stay, soft start things, and you may have that in Ireland too, where parents stay for a part of the session. So we've taken that wider. So our wish and desire would be that going forward, our Stay, Play and Learn model would be part of the entitlement that we have here in Scotland. And again, it's about parental choice, but also about meeting the needs of the family, because we truly believe in the needs of family, as I'm sure everyone here does as well. So I'm probably the opposite of Brynhildur, and my mouse is not moving on. So I will try avidly to move it on, but it's not. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. Not quite as responsive. And then it's like, do I press it too much? While I'm waiting for this to come up, when I seen the title of today's seminar, I thought, reimagining childhood, what does that actually mean? So I thought to myself, and I thought, if I were to reimagine my childhood, what would I change, you know, in relation to thinking about this? And actually, I probably wouldn't change very much. Yet we didn't have very much physically, but what we had, you know, in relationships, etc., was in abundance. So what we didn't have materially didn't really matter so much. But what we did have was freedom and choice and risk. And it was those things that, you know, have driven probably my personality. But on the other side of that, I very much grew up in a time where children should be seen and not heard. And whilst at the time I didn't question that, because I assumed the adult knew best and I would speak when I was spoken to. And I think that probably has had an influence on me as an individual. So what excites me about where we are currently in Scotland and across the world is this focus on rights and children's voice, because I think it's, and what does that actually mean in practice? So in Scotland just now, we're looking very much at the incorporation of the UNCRC into Scots law. So we're just about there, but it's really about what does that actually mean? So just now we're looking today, the focus about parental rights to entitlement. I think for me, it's always about looking at that wider picture of what that means. So for you guys in Ireland, reimagining childhood in the context of this is very exciting. And it's great that you're looking outwards to other countries for that. And again, I don't seem to be able to move on. Epic fail here. There we go. So this quote people will have seen probably time and time again. The way we treat our children in the dawn of their lives and the way we treat our elderly in the twilight of their lives is a measure of the quality of a nation. And, you know, today we're here, everyone here is committed to that because we want to do the best for children and individuals all through their life. So that's been adapted. That was an American politician. So we'll not go into his politics, but you can't deny what he's saying. So I thought it would be helpful just to kind of plot a journey for us in Scotland with the view that you can dip into it. So all these links are hyperlinked so people can dip into it. So in 2009, this framework was created, really with the priority to understand a shared view across our 32 local authorities. So that's what we have in Scotland compared to I don't know actually sure what you guys have there, but it was understood that there had to be, to drive policy truly, there had to be a shared vision of what intervention looked like. So this is an interesting document, feel free to dip into, but basically it was about recognising pre-birth and beyond what it should look like for all children in Scotland, regardless of which authority they live in. So then in 2014, law, that's when there was a significant shift in Scotland. So we had our Children and Young People Scotland Act 2014, which I will not go into in great detail. There's only 2 slides, you'll be glad to know, when it comes to legislation. But this was key in relation to the language in Scotland. So from this point, our entitlements was renamed Early Learning and Childcare, which now in Scotland it is just referred to as ELC. So if you are looking at anything in Scotland and they're talking about ELC, that this is what it is. So any service consisting of education and care of a kind which is suitable in the ordinary case for children who are under school age. So that's what we are in relation to ELC. And I thought it was interesting, in Iceland it's play school. because what we landed on, so it used to be very much nursery provision in Scotland. So this change to ELC marked a real significant change, but it all falls neatly into everything that's been spoken about already. The care, the women's role. It's the women's role to care for children. So children go to nursery to be cared for by women. You know, so even just in that one sentence, and then we could continue, women who are paid not as fairly as men. You know, it continues. So it's at what point on that journey do we feel we can be empowered to make a difference? So this move was a positive move, because it recognised that learning happens whilst children are being cared for. You know, we had our conference a couple of years ago and we called it, the title was "There's More to Learning Than Play," because we all know if a child is having their nappy changed or a child having snack or lunch, no one can deny that there isn't learning happening there, but we might not call that play. So this was really significant to say it was early learning and childcare. That has brought some challenges in relation to sort of scrutiny and inspection, and it's left us in Scotland with 2 inspection bodies, which, if you ask anyone in the sector, the private and voluntary sector particularly, that's a challenge. Who are you trying to please? And it's a real shame for the sector just now, because what they have at their heart is high quality provision for children. You know, and it's almost, if we can get that confidence in that, then the inspections are fine. That's what we always say in our messaging to the sector. But you may be aware Scotland is under a reform of the education system just now, which is quite significant. Our qualifications body has basically been told it's being scrapped. We will keep our Education Scotland in some forum, but what we are really striving for, and that's what we would really hope Ireland is in a position, you know, to do, is learn from our challenges, one inspection body. So as an organisation, that's what we are putting forward to the consultation. There needs to be one independent organisation who leads and monitors the scrutiny and evaluation and support for the sector, as opposed to having a sector who doesn't know who they have to please. So yeah, I'll just move on again. So realising the ambition is a national guidance that came in January last year, January 20, sorry. The timing was unfortunate because the world changed, and it was guidance that sought to really bring everything together for the sector. But alas, the sector's just not had the time and space to be able to embrace this. But I would really recommend a look at this document. Again, in the sector, it felt like, well, here's something else we have to do. But in actual fact, it's not about that. It's about giving the sector the space and time to realise that what they are doing is here in this guidance. And the guidance actually looks outwards as well. So it has got international learnings in it as well. So at the bottom there, the whole thing being me. So that's the underpinning part of this guidance. So, but for children to benefit, to be me, you need adults who are confident in the being me. So in Scotland just now, we are way off in relation to our gender balance. Approximately 4% of our workforce is male. So we have a huge improvements to make there. But it goes back to that the perceptions in society, you know, and that's how amazing Brynhildur was saying that when asked whose responsibility is it, it was half and half. We're just so not there in Scotland just now. So it's seen as female work in relation to early years. So we've had campaigns to bring male in, to bring diversity, because we don't have great diversity in our early years sector either. So we know this, and that's something we are absolutely committed to improving, but something hopefully you guys will perhaps get better than us. But then it comes back, just as you were saying, Sonya, it's the bottom line. You know, it's the take home. What have people got? If you've got a man who's so excited and wants to work with children, he looks at the salary and makes a decision, no. So again, there's 2 things there. Early years staff have our most prized possessions. Do you know, they should be paid in such a way that reflects that huge, you know, the research is there. Those first years are the most important. So why do we not? So later in my presentation, I had got the the living wage rates and stuff that we do have in Scotland, just to share with you. But until we get that right, we appreciate there's not going to be that huge rise from 4%. So it seems to be stuck on this. So again, I could talk about the guidance loads, but I'll just leave it in the slides. But key in it is saying what children need, interactions, experiences, and the spaces. That's what should drive the experiences for children. Equity, and this, although this is put forth in the guidance around for children, but I think we can all look at it and think about it for adults as well, and for our workforce. You know, advantage. You know, there's the apple for everyone. You know, with this advantage, then we say we're going to have equality, and we'll focus on that, but that still doesn't make it equitable until we get that last image, you know, applying equity to address disadvantage, and that goes across everything you're talking about today, you know, salaries and experiences for children. So the document's there, this is the starting point, the blueprint, again, you know, for you guys to look at and see, you know, what can you learn from there. It does have 12 drivers of quality in it that are outlined quite clearly. And then the blueprint moved on to give us next three documents, which were the operating guidance, frequent asked questions, etc. So if I were going to say to you, which one should you dip into, go to the FAQ document. It's written in straightforward language, not really helpful that the images on the pages are all the same, but they're all different. But anyway, so these are the three main documents that we would recommend if you were going to dip into. And again, just moving on. So now in Scotland, as well as our inspection criteria, we have a national standard. So all children in Scotland, from August 2020, 1,140 hours of ELC for all children 3 to 5 years, but children who fit within the eligibility criteria of 2-year-olds were also entitled to that. So that was mandated, that had to happen last in August 2020. COVID obviously happened, the mandate was lifted, but that's now been put in. So all authorities now have to offer 1,140 hours of early learning and childcare to all 3, 4 and 5-year-olds and eligible 2s. There is a move now. The government is committed to now looking at this for 1-year-olds. But to get it right for 3, 4 and 5-year-olds and 2s, we have to address the challenges we are having currently in relation to the workforce. Because whilst this policy commitment is amazing for families, for everyone, the workforce is struggling. COVID has put significant pressures on people working with salaries that are not, don't justify what they do. And in Scotland as well, so our plea to you in Ireland, we have our private and voluntary sector offering the entitlement to our partners, and then we have our local authority nursery classes offering this. The pay scales are hugely different. So we have individuals who have a qualification, the same qualification, some go one way and get the holidays and pay, some go the other and get much less. So there is a huge challenge. And the other difficulty is each authority can determine what rate they give to their private and voluntary sector per child. So what we're behind our membership to campaign to say there has to be an agreed national rate. It shouldn't be a postcode lottery of where your private voluntary sector are to see what they get from their authority. So I am really conscious of time and I don't want to be the person that takes us over. So there are lots of different slides in my presentation that I would be happy to obviously you can share. Key in this is our national approach, getting it right for every child. So in this illustration it shows you, it brings in our curricular framework as well. Again, more time I'll be able to talk about a bit more about that. And yeah, so real living wage, okay, is £9.90 just now in Scotland, and within the national standard any provider has to commit to paying that, which of course we still believe is too low for those working with our early years, our children, but it puts a challenge on our private and voluntary sector who are only getting perhaps £5, 14 pence per child. So this just illustrates the real challenge within. Great having a national standard, but it has to be truly national to allow equity across the piece. So we've got our national minimum wage, which is there as well, which shows which is less. So for many organisations, they really are trying to pay more, but it is proving hugely challenging because they're almost competing against the local authority. So it is a challenge here for us. So I'll just move on quickly. So these are our two documents, which would be really good for you to, what we want then in Scotland is a combination of these two documents. And we would love an independent body to combine these, because we believe it is care and learning. And that's what we really are striving for in Scotland. And 5 principles which we all strive to have. Yeah, I'll just stop on that. And we've got a manifesto. Yeah, I'll just stop. Happy to stop sharing now. Work fair. So yeah, lots of other wee bits and bobs that were in there, and given more time. But yeah, thank you for listening, and I hope it was helpful.
It certainly was, Michele. Thank you so much. Really interesting to see, I suppose, the deep dive into the challenges of the sector, and we'll be hearing from Frances Byrne shortly on our panel as well. I'm really taken by, just before we get to our experiences from the workplace, sorry guys, I'm taken by a couple of references to New Zealand, and also Jacinta Ardern's quote recently when she leveled the playing field between landmark legal case between social workers and prison guards, creating an equal pay strata for them based on a work of equal value as opposed to pay for equal work. And she was asked, you know, how can the private sector possibly do that to create equity in work for equal value? And she said, well, basically, if you are paying women less than men to support a particular sector, then that sector is not a profitable sector if you're relying on paying women less. So your model needs to be changed, addressed and updated. And I think that's the way we need to start looking at how we pay our low paid sectors, which are dominated by women, and dominated by women because they require the flexibility to be able to enact the additional caring duties. So this is a very circular issue that needs to be unpicked. Thank you so much, Michele, for your insights. What I am going to ask, if possible, without throwing somebody into a tailspin, is that perhaps some of those hyperlinks could be shared in the chat, and what we might move towards is putting an external resource directory on the WorkEqual website where we can share perhaps Brynhilder's slides and Michele's documentation so that we can all continue to learn by international best practice. Thank you so much. Sorry for the little curveball there. And now I hope you are all enjoying this fantastic contribution, and please do keep the chat coming. There are some questions coming in, and we will get to questions shortly, so bear with us. There is a time allotted for those, so please do get involved. Now, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Justin Sinnott, who is the manager of Transformation Project Office in Solis, and also Mary McCluskey, Engagement, Wellbeing and Diversity Manager in Permanent TSB. So 2 individuals within their workplace that understand change and understand the challenges of change, and they're going to talk to us now about, I suppose, their experience of early childcare and the policies and supports that were available to them through their organization. So Justin, as the male representative in this, you play a very, very important role. So I'd like to talk to you perhaps about your experience. You might share something.
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of my workplace and the organisation I work for, Solis, I mean, it's always been a very supportive place to work, and I think that the actual work-based policies do reflect that. It is what I would describe as it's a family-friendly place to work, and it's like a lot of agencies in the public sector that actually recognises through the flexible working arrangements that, you know, people have lives outside work, and to have a productive and happy workforce, there needs to be recognition that The policies have to reflect that as well. So, I mean, the process I took, a 1-year family career break, and again, the process for me doing that was very, very straightforward, very, very easy to access. I didn't feel there was any barriers. There was never a case where I was dissuaded from doing that. Just all I got was support. And even when I started back in the organization in September, and again, the process of coming back was very straightforward. And to be honest, after a week being back, I felt it was never away. So I know one of the challenges is how do families approach a break from their career in such a way that it doesn't affect their progression when they come back to the workforce. I think that's something that is a worry for all parents, be they male or female, that if I take time away from my career to spend time with my family and children, when I come back, what happens to the job I was in? What happens in terms of my progression? There's a gap in my CV, for example. How do I handle that? So I think there are the kind of barriers that we need to really tear down, because, you know, the way I look at it still was that, you know, we're all going to be working for at least 40 years. I mean, the way pensions are going, we'll be working until 70, 75. So to take a year or 2 years away from your career, it's not a whole lot in the totality of your complete career.
And also, you know, if you ask yourself, if you step back from the career progression, and, you know, we're very lucky to have careers and not jobs, right?
Yeah.
And to be chasing that ambition, you're stepping away so that you're being part of the development of the new adults in our society. No job, I suppose, is more important than that. But I do know that you talked about the challenges. A lot of the challenges, I think, are in particularly men's heads and perceptions around this. And I'm correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're a bit of a poster boy in Solas for taking paternity leave. It is one of the big challenges, isn't it, in reframing this as an option for men and normalizing it within our workplaces?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we want to get to a situation where I'm not speaking on panels like this as someone that's not the norm. I think, you know, the fact that I'm doing this today shows that we've a long way to go, and we've a cultural change to make. I think in some respects it's a generational thing, and the change is happening because, look, the reality is you have parents working full-time and sharing responsibility at home, so that pushes the change anyway. And again, we talk about childcare. I think it's really important to always emphasize the point that it should never be seen as a chore. Childcare is hard, but it's also, your time with your children is precious and important, and it goes very, very quickly. So we need to move away from childcare being seen as something as a burden as well, that it's something that spending time with your children is a great thing to do because it goes so quickly. On the question in terms of encouraging other dads and men to do this, I think it'll happen. I think COVID has actually brought a lot of these issues to the fore as well, because we've had almost 2 years of working from home, which means that your actual workplace is within your home. It's with your spouse, and you have your children here as well. And during the really dark months of everything being shut, you had your children and the whole family unit in the house all the time. So, you know,
nowhere to hide.
Yeah,
just
nowhere to hide.
hide.
So I think that in a sense should kind of focus minds as well. But I do think it's a cultural thing. I think it'll change. And I haven't listened to the experiences from Iceland and Scotland as well. You can see that there is things changing. But there is, I mean, I'll give you an example where kind of there is the mindset. I mean, some people who I would consider quite progressive would still refer to the year I had off. You know, like, when are you going back for your year off? Like, so, and that wasn't meant in a derogatory way, but it was just that kind of unconscious bias that, well, you had a year off. No, I didn't have a year off. That wasn't the reason I did this. So I think that's the kind of the change that has to happen, because I shouldn't be seen as someone that to be honest, I shouldn't be applauded for looking after my children and for taking a decision for as a family unit. That's, you know, it's something that, like, you know, my wife went through 2 pregnancies and 2 maternity leaves. So even with my year, it's still less than half what she did. So you just, that it's the mindset. It has to change.
It is, and I think words matter, and language matters, and how we think matters. I've been out on nights out with my girlfriends, and really bright progressive women have said to me, "Is Dave babysitting?" I'm like, "No, he's parenting." You know, so we need to think about this. You know, Mary, I might bring you in, and you know, from your position within permanent TSB in terms of well-being and diversity, you must have a sort of a very focused view on your own experiences and the policies and practices that supported you in your experience.
Yeah, so I suppose to put it into context, I have 3 kids. I have a little boy who's 7, and I have twin daughters who are turning 6 tomorrow.
Happy birthday!
Yeah, so I find myself, I suppose, in a previous job, previous to PTSB, suddenly having kind of 3 kids under the age of 2, and was kind of thrown into parenthood. And, you know, eventually when I got to a point where I felt like I could make a career change, and I was willing to be able to take a chance on myself, and felt that the sleepless nights were almost over. They're not. I applied for a job with PTSB. I very much hid, you know, even though the role was diversity and inclusion, I didn't hide the parenthood bit, but as I was going through the interview process, I hid the fact that I was on a parental leave arrangement in my current role. I didn't mention it at any point until I was offered the role. And at the point I was offered, I then said, you know, I'm on a 4-day week in my current role. Is that something that would be considered? I didn't know what my chances were. And the big reassurance and the big thing that sealed the deal for me was the fact that the hiring manager at the time, Fiona, didn't even bat an eyelid. She didn't say I have to go and think about it or talk to anyone. It was just straight away, no problem, you know, and it was so accommodating. And I think, bearing in mind that that was just over 3 years ago, you know, we've come on in leaps and bounds in that, in our smart working side of things under our D&I strategy. And I suppose COVID in some ways has really helped that along, because every organisation has had to be a lot more open to smart working and that flexibility piece. So I just recently moved from I suppose I was always conscious parental leave entitlement was going to eventually expire. I was doing 1 day a week. It was going to eventually, you know, not be available to me anymore. So I have moved to a 4-day working week arrangement, which is brilliant for me, because it does give me that reassurance that, you know, that I have that as a permanent arrangement. And again, it has been said to me, there's flexibility and openness there to amend that arrangement as needs be. So that's been a massive help to me. And I think any organisation that isn't given the consideration to that, especially now when you're looking at what an employee's market it is, you know, they're not worth, you know, wanting to work for if they're not going to show that flexibility and adaptability, if they want to engage and retain the talent that is out in the market.
And I know Indeed published a survey recently about the high levels of female graduates who were looking to assess the gender pay gap in potential organisations that they were going to work for. And I'm always mindful that the gender pay gap is the symptom, not the cause, and we need to really work on our policies and procedures. And I suppose in your position then, is there a sort of a future worthy policy out there, something that could, you know, that you could work towards in your own organisation that would make a real difference?
Yeah, I mean, we're already doing a lot of work in that space, but we by no means do we have it right or perfect at this stage. We're still very early on in our journey. So we're already looking at, we've released our gender pay gap last year. That's something we're working towards. We're looking at our gender balance side of things and setting particular targets at senior leadership level, mentoring programs for young female talent in the organisation as well. And from a parenting perspective, we had a consultation with parents who had just returned from leave recently in the past year, mothers and fathers, and asked them about their experience and asked them to tell us what could we have done better. So we've started to do a lot of work now around parental supports, coaching for new parents. And again, this isn't about the mothers. This is as much about the fathers as it is the mothers. And it's about all the different family types as well. You know, it's you know, the blended families, you know, the same-sex couples, the people who are getting surrogacy, all those different types of people, and acknowledging that there's no one model that will fit everyone. So as I said, we don't have it right, but we're having the conversation. So we're starting to try and address it. And I think that's something in itself.
And I think that's really to Michele's equity point, that, you know, this is not a cookie cutter solution. It's really looking at the individual needs. Justin and Mary, thank you. Are you okay there, Justin? Did you want to come in on something?
Yeah, no, just coughing. Sorry.
Listen, guys, I'm gonna keep moving in the interest of time. So thank you so much on behalf of Solus and Permanent TSB for your contributions today. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are now moving on to the next section of our event today. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined now by our panel, bringing together a very diverse set of perspectives around this conversation. Please welcome Roderick O'Gorman, TD, Minister for Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, Frances Byrne, Director of Policy and Advocacy. And I think, am I right, team in WorkEqual, are we going to go one at a time in terms of the participants? Somebody just let me know. Are we going to do a little intro piece first?
Yeah, each person can introduce themselves.
Yeah, so Minister, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to invite you to take the screen.
Thanks very much, Sonia. Can you hear me all right there?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, great. Well, listen, I really appreciate the invitation to speak here today and to discuss this really important issue. And I suppose within my department, I have a role specifically in terms of supporting early childhood care and education and making sure that that is accessible and obviously having good early childhood care and education facilitates parents, facilitates families. And then I have a role perhaps in terms of wider policies, in terms of equality policies. So just very briefly, and I'm sure we'll discuss this more in the questions, but just there's a lot of work happening in the early childhood care and learning at the moment. As you know, in the budget this year, we made provision for a significant new investment in services, in childcare services across the country from September next year, a new core funding model. And that is in many ways implementing a report that I'll be publishing in the next few weeks, the expert group on the funding model. There's been a group meeting for the last 2 years to look internationally at how the ELC sector is funded and what's the best way to support quality, to support accessibility, but also ensure that early childhood care and education is delivering for the most disadvantaged families as well. So our work there, that work has come to a culmination, and we decided in this year's budget to begin the process of implementing that through the core funding system. We're also very conscious of the need to support the workforce, which, as we know, is a young workforce, and predominantly indeed the vast majority of the workforce are women, and it's a workforce that is poorly paid at the moment. So a key part of this new core funding will go towards bringing up the wages of our early child care workers, our professionals in this sector, and that will be reinforced through a JLC, a joint labour committee agreement as well. But also to make sure that the careers in this area are attractive, we're bringing forth a workforce development plan to attract more people into the profession of childcare, to ensure that they have career pathways, to ensure that there's promotion opportunities for continued professional development. And that too will be launched in the next number of weeks. So very exciting time in terms of the wider structure of childcare in this country. And then just very briefly, within the wider equality remit of my role, obviously, we've increased parents' leave, which I think is substantial. We provided an additional 3 weeks per parent last budget, and in this budget from July of next year, there'll be another 2 weeks per parent, bringing it up to 7 weeks paid leave per parent. And we know the take-up of that has been really, really strong, and particularly the take-up by dads has been really, really strong, and that's something that I really welcome. We brought in the gender pay gap legislation, and you made that point that it being very much the symptom, but look, we can measure the symptom. We will have a much greater understanding of that symptom. Obviously, there's wider roles in terms of parental supports, and I think Mary spoke about that in the context of PTSB. My department early next year will be putting out a kind of a broad map of the parental supports that exist at the moment and making these more known to people, because I think a lot of particularly parents for the first time don't have a full understanding of what's out there. And also, just funny, I saw Justin on the call earlier on, and myself and Justin, we both served on Fingal County Council a couple of years ago. I remember it was around the time Justin had his first son, and I'm very conscious that just for one particular, we need to support politicians in terms of parental of maternity leave. We saw that with Helen McEntee recently, and I suppose A resolution was brought together, and that was good, but it's not a kind of a legislated one. It was one that had to be brought together. So it has to be clear that female politicians, be they in the Dáil, the Seanad, or particularly in our local councils, are able to take maternity leave, are able to take that time. And indeed, dads are entitled to take some time in those early years as well. So just maybe a broad outline of some of the things my department are doing in this field.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you so much for being with us today. And you're not alone. We have colleagues in attendance: Lorraine Clifford-Lee, Senator Emer Curry, Senator Mary Siri Carney, and we have really a broad range of support and advocacy within the halls of the Oireachtas for what we're doing here, and we're absolutely delighted with that. Thank you, and we'll come back for questions. I'd now like to invite Frances Byrne, Director of Policy and Advocacy, Early Childhood Ireland.
Thanks so much, Sonia, and thanks to yourselves at WorkEqual for the invitation to be with you. Can you hear me okay? I'm getting
perfectly.
A message. Okay, great. So look, I won't bore everyone with details about Early Childhood Ireland. Our website is earlychildhoodireland.ie. Please log on and have a look. We cover a number of areas, a lot in common with our fantastic partners in Scotland, Early Years Scotland. And like them, we are a membership organisation. About 80% of creches in Ireland are our member. And it's just so interesting, and I know, and I can see the chatter on Twitter already reacting to Iceland, and of course everybody's going to focus on fees, and of course they will, and it's so understandable, and it looks so equitable, and Irish parents will be, you know, envious, and you can understand why. But I absolutely get that. But what I also thought was interesting, and it's just so welcome to hear from a state employer and a private employer about their role, because certainly one of the things that, notwithstanding that government has done a lot and continues to do a lot around parental leave, which is so welcome, at some point we will need a national conversation about employers. So there are employers who easily or happily, for example, will top up the statutory benefits that are paid, and there are employers who just can't. And we've been saying in Early Childhood Ireland, you know, for a long time, around that first year, it's really important that a national conversation takes place, that we hear from progressive employers that we've heard from, and worried employers as well. The European Commission has repeatedly said that if you want to get parents, and especially dads, to take time off during that first year, you can have all the mandatory statutory entitlement you like, but if people are going to be falling into poverty during what, for anyone who's been a parent, will tell you is the most expensive year you will ever have, you know, before the Nintendos, etc., kick in. But very seriously, that's important, and I thought that was interesting. On the Icelandic side, and it's hugely important for children. All the evidence shows that, with a number of exceptions where children are in very difficult circumstances at home, that first year it's critical that there is one caregiver or shared in a two-parent family, and that consistency is so important for brain development. So it's certainly a conversation we should have in Ireland. And the other things about Ireland, and I know I got very clear instructions on being solution focused, and I know that a lot of the time Early Childhood Ireland and other colleagues in other organisations will, you know, we'll find ourselves on the airwaves talking about what doesn't work and what hasn't worked, and certainly what the Minister is describing, absolutely fantastic that we are getting the overall direction of travel right finally in Ireland about investment, and that is so welcome, and we have applauded that. And we have said, and others have said, it's not rocket science. Political leadership is what's badly needed. And it is what has happened in Scotland. And as we've heard from Michele, and of course, Early Childhood Ireland has some inside track because of our working relationship with Early Years Scotland and others on the two islands. Of course, what has proven difficult in Scotland, just as it does in Ireland, is that worthy goal that the Scottish government said, you know, the rights of children and all the wonderful things that have happened in relation to curriculum and standards, which is the good news story about Ireland as well. But then you go and try and attract and retain staff, and it is a big problem here in Ireland as well. And of course, it's highly gendered. As the Minister has said, 98% of the brilliant, wonderful 31,000 staff in our sector are women, the majority of whom are on low pay. And it is great that the current Minister has taken the baton from the previous one. And we are going to see workforce development, and it's really good that the Minister has prioritised that. So in Ireland, to sum up, it is a very gendered issue. And one of the reasons why we find ourselves sort of in the fragmented is the most objective way of describing it, is because it culturally has been seen as a women's issue. We've heard that even from Justin, we've heard that from you, Sonya, and we really need to get away from that. And because it has been seen like that, it has been seen as a women's problem to solve. And I think it's really regrettable that 98% of staff in the sector are women, because we would love to see more men coming into childcare. And when you talk to them, the reason that they give is low pay. And so it's really, really important that we increase the pay of the 31,000 largely who are women. And of course, that will attract better diversity across the board. But look, overall, we hope, with our fingers crossed, that the overall direction of travel is very welcome. We have a great strategy called First Five, which again is important, and the current government has signed up to that, if you will, and the Minister is implementing it. Of course, Early Childhood Ireland would want it all to be much faster, but the bottom line in Ireland is that even with the commitments that the Minister has laid out on investment, we need more and more increased investment, and we need to make this, and I don't want to say this in everyone's problem. It's not just a female problem, and we absolutely need to see that investment continue and increase more, so that we can be closer to Iceland. Thank you.
Loud and clear, Frances, absolutely. And this really very much is a societal problem, and that's a conversation that we have all the time. And I think you only have to look at the cost to our health system at the moment for child and adolescent mental health issues to understand that actually the entire system is dysfunctional, and the investment that we make as a government, as a society, and as individuals in our children, to allow them, as Michele said, to have space and risk and respect and trust, that's going to create a different type of adult human to drive a better society in Ireland. So absolutely, I hear you. I'd now like to welcome long-term friend of WorkEqual. In fact, he was there when it all began at the launch of the Solace Women on Home Duties report, when the idea was hatched. Mark Paul, business affairs correspondent from the Irish Times. Mark, you have a million different perspectives on this one. I'm dying to hear which one you share.
Thanks very much, Sonya. Well, look, I suppose, look, as I'm the business affairs correspondent of the Irish Times, but I also get to write a column, so that I suppose gives me a bit of a platform to mouth off on all sorts of different topics. And I suppose I would come at this topic from two different perspectives. One in terms of media representations of these issues, and then the other one in terms of the economic and the cost side of it. Because I spend a lot of my time talking to businesses, but just on the media representation side, I suppose I'd like to give you a tale of two different stories, almost a decade apart. The first one is now, the Minister already mentioned Helen McAtee, who is the Minister for Justice, and she had a baby and she went off. She was the first serving minister to give birth, and she went off on maternity leave, and now she's back. But if you saw in the media this month, her husband, Paul Hickey, has actually taken 6 months off parental leave, and now that she's gone back to work in government, he's taken 6 months off. And he's spoken about this a lot in the media, and he's been praised in the media, and the representation has been very positive, that it's a very, very positive thing for him to do, to try and I suppose set an example for other men, that this is something that's normal, and that men should do this, and that they shouldn't be thanked for it. It's just a regular, normal thing to do, and that men should take time off very early in their child's lives, in their baby's lives, to go home and care. Now, contrast that with something that happened only 11 years ago. It's not exactly the same issue, but it's similar from a media point of view. It's viewed within a similar lens, and it's actually a Green Party issue. And the Minister might remember back the last time the Green Party was in government in 2010. They called a press conference to call for a general election. The country had just gone into meltdown. Ireland was going into a bailout, and the 8 Green Party TDs lined up on a table at this press conference to call for the end of the government. And one of those TDs, Paul Gogarty, brought with him his 18-month-old daughter, Daisy, and he popped her up on the table at the press conference, and it caused a national furore. Bearing in mind, this is only 11 years ago, and it caused a national furore. And he was deeply, deeply criticised in the media for doing this, for mixing his work life and his home life, which we all do now as a matter of course. And he was deeply criticised for that. I was reading this morning an article in a paper, not our paper, it was another paper, written at the time, where they brought in a psychologist to talk about what he had done and the damage that he had done. He was tried in the court of public media, the sort of high court of Irish trial by media, which is Liveline, an RTE, a phone-in show, where people said that he had ruined the reputation of the country. And he was harassed and harangued for this. And I think it was actually very, it was something, look, Paul Gogarty sometimes was given over to acts of political theatre. And so maybe there was a little bit of that involved, but he was quite taken aback by it. He called it a rant fest, and I agree with him completely. It was a horrific way that he was treated. But so if you look at how far we've come in terms of media representations from then to where we are now, they're completely different. And of course, we still have a long way to go. But look, it's better now in the media than it used to be. If you look at Stella Creasy, who is a Labour Party TD in the UK, and last week she brought her baby, which I think is only a couple of months old, in a sling into Parliament for a vote, and she was actually formally reprimanded for doing so. But there was a huge uproar in the media that she was formally reprimanded, and I think if that had happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or maybe even 7 or 8 years ago, there wouldn't have been as much of an uproar in her favour. So media representations on these issues are changing, they're improving, but there's still a long way to go. Then I suppose the second perspective that I would come at this from will be around the issue of the economics and the cost of these things. And these also feed into the media representations. I mean, look, what's happening in Iceland is fantastic. And when you see the entry level cost that people only have to pay there, when you see the entitlements that they have, when you see the entitlements that fathers have, but you can't get away from the fact that in order to bring about that change, there is an economic cost. Whether it's to businesses or whether it's to the public purse through the state, and that has to be spoken about. Otherwise, policy proposals aren't taken seriously by particular types of journalists. I mean, we can talk about extending the rights of fathers for parental leave or for paternity leave or for shared leave, but unless those conversations are also mixed in with what these things cost, they don't get bumped up the political agenda, and sometimes they can often be. If you talk about policy implementation without addressing the cost, it can be viewed in the media as a kind of a pet left-wing concern, when in reality it's not a left-wing issue. And we know from history in this country that all the big socio-economic and political issues get solved when they move beyond left-right politics. And we've seen that with Northern Ireland. In the 80s, Northern Ireland was a kind of a Punch and Judy show between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. It was only in the 1990s when Albert Reynolds, a Fianna Fáil Taoiseach, basically began a peace process, which was handed over to a Fine Gael Taoiseach, and John Bruton, who extended it, which is then handed back to another Fianna Fáil Taoiseach, and Bertie Ahern, that Northern Ireland effectively got solved. And we're seeing the same kind of metamorphosis with the climate change issue. Which is moving from being and has moved, and a lot of this, you put the credit for the Green Party. It has moved from being something that's viewed as a left-wing issue to an issue for everybody. And I think with childcare and the role of fathers in the home and the role of women in the workplace and how all of those issues meld together, I think that is starting to make that turn now, that it isn't viewed as a left-wing or as a right-wing issue. And it's only when something moves beyond politics like that that it gets addressed to a certain way in the media. But then just touching upon something that Francis said, which was about employers and the economic cost of this. We have, I think, in Ireland a 3-speed economy that I suppose differentiates between the amount of resources that different employers can put into these issues. I mean, Paul Hickey, Hel McEntee's husband, who's just taken the 6 months off parental leave, he can do that because he's on full pay for that 6 months from Novartis, which is a Swiss pharmaceutical company. It's got a turnover of $50 billion per year, and it's a Swiss company. It's a very, very rich, wealthy multinational. It can afford to do that. Not every country or company in Ireland can afford to top up and those kind of entitlements. So when I say we have a three-speed economy, we've basically got the FDI sector, the foreign direct investment sector, foreign companies. They can afford much more lavish policies than most of the Irish economy has. It's just because there's so much money slashing around that system, maybe because they're so tax efficient or they're so tax clever in the way they do things. The second speed of the three-speed economy then is the domestic economy, and that's split into two. You have the parts of the economy that really haven't been hit at all by COVID. You have professional services, law firms, accountants, and so on. They can afford to bring in very lavish or expensive policies to top things up. But other parts of the economy, the third part of this three-speed economy, can't. And that's the part of the economy that has been absolutely ransacked by the COVID restrictions. That's retail, hospitality, tourism, those kind of sectors. And if you talk to employers in those sectors, and if you say, look, would you top up paternity leave? Would you top up parents' leave? Would you top up shared parental leave? You know, do you have the money to do that? And they don't. They're surviving hand to mouth on a day-to-day basis. So that brings into question that if these businesses can't top up or can't add extra to what the entitlements that the state gives, well, who steps in to bridge the cost? And obviously, there's only one actor in all of this who can step in, and that's the state. But the state can't pay for everything all of the time. That's not an ideological viewpoint. I think that's just pragmatic. And so bringing it back to media representation, if you talk about policies without cost attached and without a discussion of what they might cost, bearing in mind that there's a cost of not doing these things, I accept that. But if you talk about these policies without talking about the financial cost, they tend not to be taken seriously by political columnists, by financial writers, and it's only when they're taken, and really, it's when these policy proposals are taken seriously, and the pressure comes from that part of the journalistic community. That tends to be when politicians take notice and things get done. So I think you've always got to talk about the cost. And just, I suppose, just to wrap up, just touching on something that Justin spoke about in his presentation, that's about the sort of cultural changes that we might see from working from home. I mean, I've been working from home now for over 18 months. I haven't been in the office at all. I've only been in the office, the Irish Times office, twice since the pandemic started, and both times was to get my flu jab. You know, I have my kids are at school now, but when they're not at school, I mean, they're running around in and out between my legs while I'm working. And my wife is a teacher, so she goes out to work every day, every single day, and I don't. I stay here. I think in the longer term, I would be quite optimistic about the sort of cultural changes that sort of everyday change will engender in people's thinking, in media representation. I mean, working from home with fathers, childcare, and maternity, paternity, all of these issues, they're being written about in the media now so much more as a result of the pandemic that eventually that will spur some sort of social change, some sort of societal change, and some sort of attitudinal change that might be hard to measure, that might be hard to predict when it will happen. But suddenly, you know, change can happen very, very slowly, and then suddenly it can happen all at once. And I suppose just finish off, bringing it back to the sort of the politicians, Paul Gogarty and Helen McEntee's husband and Stella Creasy. You know, as I said, nobody batted an eyelid when Stella Creasy walked into British Parliament with her baby in a sling over her shoulder. I think you'll really know that changes come when male politicians walk in to the Dáil, when Leo Varadkar or Roderick or Simon Harris or somebody takes questions, ministerial questions, with a kid slung over their shoulder chewing on a muslin cloth. That's when you'll know that real societal change has arrived. And I'd be pretty optimistic. I don't think we're terribly far away from that. And once you have that, then you have the policy making capability to make the changes that everybody wants. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mark. Yeah, that sounds good to me. I can see how that would make a huge impact. And you know, in our first conference in 2019, that addressing societal norms was a pillar of change. Absolutely, we really recognise that. Yeah, so the cost to society and the cost to not doing it, we'll have to run the numbers on the cost of not doing it, because I think for the most part, our companies and our company cultures are not supporting the way that we want to live our lives. And you know, in a talent economy, regardless of how profitable your sector is, this is something that we need to look at. And I think if you look at, say the beleaguered sectors, you know, part of the problem is that they cannot get staff. If we can create a culture where talent is attracted from other parts of the world to support a burgeoning economy, then that in turn creates prosperity all around. But yeah, points well made, absolutely, as ever. I'd now like to invite Aisling Campbell, who is the HR lead at Accenture Operations, to give a little bit of context. I put out a note on LinkedIn asking for people to share their organizational gold standard and best practice. What does excellence look like in terms of caring provision within an organization? And really, there was very little response. And I think that's because we don't, for the most part, even know what excellent looks like, because it's such a rare beast. Aisling then went on to put her own post out around supports that she had availed of within the Accenture structure. I thought it was a good opportunity for her to come and join us to share her experience. Aisling, you're very welcome.
Great, thanks for having me, Sonia. So hi everyone, I'm HR lead with Accenture Operations, but I'm also a working parent to a very fun-loving preschooler who definitely keeps me on my toes. And from that role as a mum, I have to say I personally have amazing childcare support with a creche. We've been with them for 3.5 years. They are absolutely amazing. And my husband and I could not have continued our careers in the way that we wanted to without the support of that creche. But in my role as a HR lead in a large organisation in Ireland, I am acutely aware of the challenges that new parents, parents-to-be, people considering becoming a parent are facing when it comes to accessing and being able to avail of childcare as well. And we all know the challenges that exist, but I think what's great about today's forum is bringing together the different perspectives, because I really think if we're going to reimagine childcare, it's going to be this multifaceted and multidisciplinary approach that we'll all need to take. And I totally agree with Mark's point. We have different types of organisations. It's not about increasing leave. It's not about pumping more money in from an organisational perspective. There's so much more to this, and it's about supporting working parents. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But we also need to ensure that we include parents as part of this conversation. And I'm really mindful of that when I speak to different employees in our organisation who have very different preferences, personal choice that they want to make. So parents need to be part of this conversation with us. Parenting is hugely personal, as we all know, and their needs need to be taken into account. I do want to call out a piece of Accenture research that we published in September 2020. It was called our Net Better Off research, and it talked about 6 fundamental human needs that are really important. And if you can meet these as an organisation, you can really help people achieve their potential. And they were the emotional and mental needs, the relational needs, the physical needs, the financial needs, the purposeful, and the employable. And if you think about it, parenting touches all of these. And that's why organisations need to take into account how can we really support working parents. And I have a wonderful mentor, and somebody who I work with. And, you know, I've talked to her about my various childcare challenges over the last year as the pandemic has impacted all of us with preschoolers and those at school age. And she said to me, Aisling, you know, this is a point in time. Make sure the micro decisions that you feel you might need to make right now because of the pressures you're facing about different things don't impact you longer. And I think for me, as a parent, that obviously really held through, but also in my role as a HR lead, that actually parenting is a chapter in our employees' lives, and we need to really support and be there for them in those moments that matter. And I think we have a role to play in doing that as well. So delighted to be here, and thanks for involving us in the conversation, Sonia.
Thanks so much for taking part. Now, if anybody has any questions, be sure to drop them into the chat. We have an illustrious and highly experienced panel who we can draw upon for the answers. I'd like to go to the Minister first. Roderick, I'd love to get a sense, because I kind of feel, you know, if you don't know where you're going anywhere, any road will take you there. And I can understand that there are incremental wins in terms of expenditure and policy. Have you got a sense yourself of what excellence looks like. I'm not sure, you may not have been able to join the call for Brynhildur's contribution in terms of the Icelandic situation, but it would be great to get a kind of an end game vision of what perfection looks like insofar as we can reach it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point. I suppose my view is a system that has dramatically increased public investment, and that's met with increased public management as well. And I think in Ireland we've had this debate on, we need a public model of childcare, and look, I think that's a good discussion to have. And I know this idea of the Donogh O'Malley moment for childcare is we need that right now. I think Laura Bambrick, the ICTU economist, she made a very good point that the Donogh O'Malley moment wasn't a moment. It was 5 or 10 years subsequently of policy making that delivered free secondary education in this country. So my focus at the moment is to provide that additional investment that gets us our quality outcomes, that protects the livelihoods of childcare professionals in the sector, stops the hemorrhaging of them out to other areas that we're seeing at the moment, recognises the incredible importance of the work they do, recognises the huge training that they have to do to be in a position to undertake that job every day, and make it attractive for them to stay. And that benefits parents, that benefits children. And by the state supporting significantly their enhanced wages, we take some of the pressure off the services as well, because we know we have, from large chains down to two-woman operations, and a lot of childcare is provided by those small, kind of family operations that are, have that very long-standing connections in their local community, and which are really important, but also are running basically just to keep even. They aren't raking in large profits, and by ensuring they're sustainable, we take the burden away from parents. And one of the key things that we're saying in terms of the extra investment we're putting in next year, we're linking that to a capping of fees, that in 2022 providers would be paying what they would be charging what they were paying in 2021. Now, I know in a lot of cases that's still expensive, but by getting a cap on the fees in future, when we put more money into the NCS, the National Childcare Scheme, and as you know, we've broadened out the NCS now all the way up to 15. So as we put more money in, parents will actually see the benefit of that in their pockets, whereas up to now, where money has been put into the NCS, it's often been eroded straight away by increases in fees charged by providers. So increased public investment, but linked to increased public management as well. That idea of a cap on fees, that idea that all services who want to benefit from the core funding should be offering the NCS other than HA only services. And by doing so, we recognize, I suppose, the diversity of the sector, but we also are supporting those key quality outcomes. And though it kind of gives us the space then to look at, are there areas where maybe the state needs to get more involved in? And one of the key points that will be coming from the expert group on the funding model is this notion of a DESH type approach to childcare, that for certain areas we need additional supports. And I know I know we have particularly community childcare providers in some of our most disadvantaged communities who do huge work in terms of hot morning and midday meals, in terms of providing a safe space for a lot of children where home life mightn't be the safe space we'd all like it to be. And I think the expert group is bringing forward some really interesting proposals in terms of, I suppose, universal supports, recognizing that there's pockets of disadvantage, even some of the wealthiest communities across our country. And as a politician, we recognize that you can be going through an area regarded as quite well off socioeconomically, but you can find those pockets of disadvantage, and the local childcare provider needs to be able to support those, but also a targeted element as well.
Yeah, I mean, the last OECD report that I was available in terms of expenditure on early childhood, I think we were we're certainly below the European average, below Latvia and Portugal, I think, and I suppose it's a sense of the ambition of who we want to be in terms of early learning and childcare amongst our European community or beyond, I guess, you know. So it'd be great to come back to you after this and the learnings that we have come to with a sort of our own version of best steps to accelerate progress. And it's great to see what's being done, but I think there's a sense of frustration from everybody in terms of the time it's taking, and we acknowledge that grassroots always moves faster than legislation. So thank you very much, Minister. I have a question for Frances. Frances, this 92% female, I mean that is an issue in itself, and we have SOLAS, which is the higher education and training agency of the state, as one of our sponsors. Wouldn't it be wonderful to start to see a sort of an inculcation of male members into childhood? Because I think our children need that. They need early male role models as well as female. How do we even begin to do that?
Well, no, I mean, absolutely, Sonia. And, you know, we see it, you know, across the board. So we want more women to go into politics because we know that if women become visible in those roles, then girls will follow suit, and similarly in early years care and education and in after school, we do need to start seeing men across the board in those caring roles, because it's reinforcing all of the things that Mark was talking about and others on the panel. So, you know, in a nutshell, we know that pay is going to be because of everything. And again, this is why it's so complex and societal, because we know that one of the reasons why this is a gendered issue across the board is because traditionally men are, you know, we have a gender pay gap. That's why your organization is here. And so all of that is feeding in a really negative cycle, if you will. If I could just add very quickly, I know we're pressed for time, and I completely agree with what the Minister is saying about the Donagh O'Malley moment. The other thing about the Donagh O'Malley moment was that it was the state and Donagh O'Malley making a decision, recognising the importance of education. And so realising that in order for Ireland to thrive economically, actually, that we needed an educated workforce, and what a success it has been. If you look, I mean, that's a very positive story about Ireland. And I suppose for us in early childhood Ireland, the reason why we would jump on the coattails of a Donagh O'Malley moment is because we want society at large, of all genders, to recognise, vote for and value the importance of early years care and education, and to value it at least as much as we all value primary and, in the last however number of years, secondary education. And that is a big mindset change that we're all part of. So yeah.
Thank you. Mark, is there a case to be made? And of course, I am essentially utopian in my philosophy for life, and always looking for the positive in this. But is there a case to be made, given that there's a recent report that the cost of lack of engagement and absenteeism to the American economy runs at about $228 billion a year? So, to my point, it's not working right now. Is there a sort of a cost analysis to the power of creating systems that recognize the needs of humans and individuals within this caring and very real society that we're in?
If there is a cost analysis, I don't really know about it, but there should be one. Is probably the answer, and you probably cut into the heart of the issue. I think there's a lack of hard financial data around this. Data tends to illuminate conversations. I mean, I'm a business journalist and by trade, if not by intention, but we were always taught starting out in journalism to just throw loads of numbers into your articles because it makes your argument sound better. And I think we need more data on the economic impact of not doing some of the things that are being called for, and also the temporary economic cost of what has to happen on a transition. I noticed from some of Brynhildur's comments, I think in the chat, where she talks about who pays for the parental leave in Iceland, and apparently it's not employers that pay for it, it's a private insurance fund. That's a very Northern European thing to do, and it's similar to what they do in Switzerland with unemployment, where actually you get 70 or 80% of your salary when you're for up to 2 years when you're unemployed, because you're paid out of this fund that everybody is obligated to pay into. If we have more and more of this hard financial data, if the media talks about it more and asks for it more, asks for more from politicians, if societal groups and civic groups invest more in research to come up with the hard data, with the hard data comes harder conversations. Yeah. And those conversations, I think, I think they're moving up the value chain in journalism and those kind of economic conversations, but we do need to have more of them, and it needs to be populated with numbers.
And actually our amazing guest from last year's conference, Professor Linda Scott, The Double X Economy, it has a book full of the hard economic facts of creating that double X economy and unlocking the power of women in the workforce. Aisling, thank you so much, Mark. Aisling, you know, you have availed of this wonderful, in your LinkedIn post, you're talking about this kind of almost emergency third level childcare in Accenture, that if things were, you know, going a bit wrong, because I always felt that you had to have primary, secondary and tertiary childcare solutions available to you as a working mother. You know, the first one was the one that you pay for. The second one is calling on friends and family. And the third one is you're staying home. But, you know, is there policies, or are there policies that are kind of, you know, the utopian dream? What would absolutely best practice look like in Accenture that perhaps doesn't yet exist?
Yeah, like we obviously, as a large corporate, we have many of the leave policies that other corporates in Ireland would have as well that offer top up. But I describe that as the planned and predictable, right? You plan that off. And if I've learned anything in the last 4 years, parenting is not predictable. And parenting is not predictable. And yes, we have wonderful childcare, but due to circumstances totally unforeseen and out of their control, it was not available for a couple of weeks. So back in February 2021, we have an amazing reward team, and they're very creative, and they're always coming up with amazing solutions, and they know our employees really well. They actually formed a partnership with Bright Horizons, and Bright Horizons is our childcare entity in the States, who've also been very present in the Irish and the UK markets as well. But Bright Horizons basically offers two main offerings to our people, our working parents, people who are planning to become parents, people who might never wish to become parents as well. But basically those two aspects are, first of all, access to experts to ask questions about whatever it is the topic of the moment is, fussy eating, tantrums, whatever it is, but also then backup care for both childcare and elder care. And we've been on a journey this year promoting that internally. And it's one of those things in HR, you know, I never thought I'd have to use it because our childcare is usually so consistent and reliable, but totally black swan event had happened. And we were actually able to, that offering enables you to avail of up to 10 days nanny, in-home nanny support or support through a local centre. And I think for my husband and I, we do have options to take leave, but at that particular 2 weeks of October, for different reasons, it was not something either of us felt that we wanted to do if we could avoid it, quite frankly. And, you know, we'd take another leave with our son and we've enjoyed that hugely, but just at this particular point in time. So Bright Horizons were able to source and locate a nanny who was able to come to our home, and the relief was palpable. So as you talk about the secondary piece, it was pulling into that as well. And again, comes down to personal choice and what people are comfortable with that I've talked about already. For us, our parents provide amazing support, but they're also living their life. You know, they've been through the childcare piece, and we didn't want to pull on them at that particular point in time. But I think organisations can think about this in a tiered way, really listen to parents, really understand what is it that they can do that can help, what is it that we as organisations can do to help parents in those tricky moments, those challenging moments where that extra bit of support is needed. And I think as organisations, we also need to drive a culture where parenting is seen and heard. And by that, I mean that we're really open to yes, somebody might have to step out early if the phone call comes from creche or the childminder, or there's a sick child at home. And we also need to check our unconscious biases as well, that we're not saying, oh, Aisling got the call, away goes Aisling, that's completely fine. Whereas if Mark gets the call, we need to make sure that we're supporting and accommodating Mark in exactly the same way that we would with Aisling as well. So I think there's lots of organisations can do. It's about listening to their employees, it's about listening to their people. And I think, you know, having benefited from that support, I was probably, you know, it just meant so much at a particularly busy time for us. But as I said, that's personalised for what we mean as well. And I don't think we should ever try to have a one size fits all in what organisations provide, be it leave, extra supports or culture. We need to work with a personalised approach. So, yeah.
Agreed. Thank you, Aisling. That really, I think we'll all agree that that was an extremely illuminating discussion from a multiplicity of perspectives today. We heard, of course, from Brynhildur on, I suppose, international gold standard as it has been defined, with Iceland having the absolute most equal, gender equal society, and Michele's contribution in terms of really unpicking what was already created and redesigning it to be future-proofed. And from our own contributions from Mary and Justin in terms of their personal experience, and from our panel, Minister O'Gorman, thank you so much for joining us. Aisling, Mark and Francis, thank you so much for your contributions. What we will do as ever in WorkEqual is take these pieces of information, mold them into what we see are tangible steps forward to accelerate the rate of change. Thank you so much to the audience, to everybody at WorkEqual and Alice PR for making this possible. Thank you for joining us. If you know anybody who think might benefit from watching this event, this piece, this contribution, please do share the link. We'll be posting it on our social channels and on the workequal.ie. If you're interested in finding out more about WorkEqual and the work that we do in supporting women across Ireland into economic independence and employment, you can join us on workequal.ie and keep abreast of everything that we're doing. Your support means so much to us, so keep on coming back. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.